They say that blood is thicker than water. It is a phrase that gets thrown around at family reunions, holiday dinners, and funerals. People use it as a shield to excuse the inexcusable. But what they don't tell you is that sometimes blood isn't a bond. Sometimes blood is a chain. I am 43 years old. For 43 years, I have lived under the shadow of a man who does not view himself as a father, but as a king. My father has always had this deeply ingrained, unshakable belief that he is the undisputed head of our entire family and the extended family as well. He sits at the head of the table at every gathering, waiting for his ring to be kissed. His opinions are not suggestions, they are decrees. If someone buys a house, he needs to approve the neighborhood. If someone changes careers, he expects a detailed justification. He operates an emotional dictatorship where compliance is the only currency that buys his affection. When my mother was alive, she was the buffer. She had this incredible, quiet grace about her. She knew how to navigate his ego, how to soften his sharp edges, and how to protect my younger brother and me from the worst of his tyrannical moods. She was the glue that held the illusion of a happy family together. But then, in 2012, we lost her. When my mother passed away, the dynamic in our family didn't just shift, it shattered. The buffer was gone. Without her there to temper him, my father's need for absolute dominance metastasized. He didn't just want respect anymore. He demanded total, unquestioning submission. And unfortunately, the rest of the family, specifically my two uncles and my aunt, fell right into line. They became his echo chamber, his loyal subjects, adopting his views, his prejudices, and his rigid demands. For a long time, I played the game. I kept my head down. I built my own life, established my career, and maintained a polite, superficial distance. I thought I had found a way to survive the family structure without letting it break me. But then I found something that changed everything. I found peace. And in my family, peace is viewed as an act of rebellion. I met my fiancée a few years ago. She is 38 years old, originally from Laos, and she is the most extraordinary human being I have ever known. Coming from a family where everything was loud, transactional, and soaked in passive aggression, being with her was like stepping out of a freezing storm into a warm, quiet room. Her family operates on a foundation of genuine, unconditional respect. They don't scream to be heard, they don't use guilt as a weapon, they just love each other. Through her, I also found my spiritual path. We are both practicing Buddhists. The philosophy, the mindfulness, the dedication to letting go of ego and attachment, it saved my life. It helped me process the lingering grief of losing my mother, and it gave me the tools to finally see my father's behavior for what it truly was, a manifestation of deep, unhealed insecurity. When I proposed to her, it was the happiest moment of my 43 years on this earth. I felt like I was finally starting my real life. Naturally, you want to share that kind of joy with the people who brought you into the world. You want the cinematic moment. You want your father to clap you on the back, pull you into a hug, and tell you he is proud of you. Even after everything, that inner child inside of me still desperately wanted my father's approval. So I called him. I remember gripping the phone, my heart pounding with excitement. When he answered, I didn't waste any time. I said, "Dad, I have some incredible news. I just got engaged." There was no gasp of joy. There was no congratulations. Instead, a heavy, dead silence stretched across the line. Finally, his voice came through, completely flat, dripping with a subtle, condescending venom. "To who?" he asked. The question hit me like a physical blow. To who? I had been dating my girlfriend for years. He knew exactly who she was. He knew her name. He knew she was the woman I lived with and loved. But asking to who was his way of immediately invalidating her existence. It was a power play designed to make me feel small. I swallowed the lump in my throat and replied, my girlfriend. Another agonizing pause, then a sigh that sounded more like an inconvenience than an expression of emotion. "Oh, congratulations, I guess." I guess. Those words burned themselves into my brain. Congratulations, I guess. They have stuck with me every single day since that phone call. It wasn't just a lack of enthusiasm. It was a deliberate dismissal of my happiness. It was the first red flag, flapping violently in the wind, warning me of the storm that was about to hit. But I ignored it. I made excuses for him, like I always did. I told myself he was just caught off guard. I had no idea that the real nightmare hadn't even begun. Because my fiancé and I are practicing Buddhists, the spiritual foundation of our marriage is incredibly important to us. In our tradition, you don't just blindly pick a Saturday in the summer that works for a catering hall. The date of the union is sacred. We consulted with the monks at our temple. They looked at our birth dates, our astrological charts, and the flow of our spiritual energy. After careful consideration, they presented us with a date that lined up perfectly with our energies. October 4th, 2026. To us, it wasn't just a date on a calendar. It was a blessing. It was the day the universe aligned for us to begin our lives as husband and wife. In late September of 2025, a full year in advance, we started calling our immediate families to let them know to mark their calendars. I picked up the phone and dialed my father's number again. I thought giving him over years notice would be a sign of respect. "Dad," I said, keeping my voice bright and positive, "we officially have a wedding date. It's going to be October 4th, 2026. I waited for him to say he would put it in his calendar. I waited for him to ask where it would be held. Instead, he didn't miss a beat. His tone was brisk, authoritative, and completely void of warmth. "Okay," he said, "but that's not going to work with me. I'll get back to you with a better date." I sat there in my living room, the phone pressed to my ear, completely paralyzed. My brain could not process the absolute sheer audacity of the sentence that had just come out of his mouth. "I'll get back to you with a better date." He wasn't saying he had a conflict. He wasn't saying he had a pre-planned vacation or a medical procedure. He was rejecting the date of my wedding simply because he hadn't been the one to choose it, because I hadn't come to him on bended knee to ask for his royal permission to get married on a specific Sunday in October. I didn't respond. I literally didn't know how. The silence stretched until he abruptly ended the call. I told myself it was a misunderstanding. I thought perhaps if I gave him a day or two to cool off, he would realize how insane he sounded and back down. I was wrong. A few hours later, my phone buzzed on the coffee table. It was a text message from him. I opened it, and the words on the screen made my blood run ice cold. The text read, "December 12th is better, get married then. I'll tell everyone you're switching it." Read that text message again. Let the sheer, pathological arrogance of it sink into your bones. He had gone into his own calendar, picked a random day in the dead of winter that suited his personal preferences, and dictated that I move the most important day of my life to accommodate his ego. And worse, he was threatening to bypass me entirely and announce to the entire extended family that the date was changed, essentially forcing my hand through public humiliation. He was trying to stage a hostile takeover of my wedding. My hands were shaking as I typed my response. For the first time in 43 years, I did not cower. I did not try to negotiate with the terrorist of my family. I typed, "Dad, it's still October 4th. We're not changing it. We're both practicing Buddhists. The date was chosen by the monks. It lines up best with our birth dates and our energy." I hit send. I gave him the logical, spiritual, and deeply personal reason why the date was immovable. I appealed to his basic sense of human decency, hoping that respecting our religion would be enough to make him back off. His response came back instantly. He didn't even take 30 seconds to read and process what I had written. He just unleashed the poison he had been holding in for years. The text bubble popped up, "You're the loser in this family. You just had to get married to her. Plus a disappointment to this family. If you want to redeem yourself, you need to do what I say." There it was. The mask hadn't just slipped. It had shattered into a million pieces on the floor. You just had to get married to her. The capitalization of the word her, the dripping, undisguised venom. This was never about a date on a calendar. This was never about October versus December. This was about race. This was about xenophobia. This was about his deep-seated bigotry. My fiancée is a brilliant, kind, empathetic woman from Laos. And to my father and to the echo chamber of my two uncles and my aunt, that made her non-American. It made her an outsider. It made her a threat to the pure, rigid, isolated little kingdom my father had built for himself. By choosing to marry her, by choosing a Buddhist ceremony, by choosing a life outside of his direct control, I had become the loser of the family. I had become a disappointment. And the most vile part of his message was the end. If you want to redeem yourself, you need to do what I say. He was holding his love, his presence at my wedding, and his identity as my father hostage. He was demanding that I disrespect my future wife, disrespect my religion, and bow to his bigotry in order to buy back his approval. I looked at my phone. The screen was blurring through tears of absolute rage and profound, soul-crushing grief. I realized in that exact second that the father I had always hoped for, the one who would eventually come around and be proud of me, did not exist. He was a phantom. The man texting me was a cruel, bigoted dictator. I replied with one final message. I'm not changing it, that's final. After that text exchange, the communication between us effectively died. The silence was deafening. He didn't call to apologize. He didn't text to back down. He simply withdrew, waiting for me to break. He expected me to crawl back to him, begging for his forgiveness for daring to set boundaries. But I didn't. I held the line. The last time we truly spoke was during the Christmas holidays. It was a forced family gathering, the kind where everyone smiles with their teeth but their eyes are dead. I walked into the house, feeling the suffocating weight of my aunt and two uncles staring at me. They are the loyal soldiers of his regime, disappointed bigots who look down their noses at my non-American fiancée, speaking in hushed whispers whenever she is in the room. My fiancée graciously chose to attend with me, showing a level of class and dignity that my family will never possess. At one point in the evening, my father cornered me in the hallway near the kitchen. He held a drink in his hand, his eyes cold and assessing. He looked at me, tilting his head slightly, and asked in a low, gravelly voice, "Do you still intend to marry her?" He didn't use her name. He refused to give her the dignity of a human identity. She was just her, the problem, the obstacle. I stood up straight, looked him dead in the eye, and said, "Yes." He didn't scream, he didn't yell. He just looked at me with an expression of absolute disgust, slowly shook his head, and walked away. That was it. That was the last meaningful interaction I had with the man who is supposed to walk down the aisle and stand beside me as I start my new life. Since those holidays, he has become an absolutely cruel human being. The passive aggression has turned into active isolation. He has weaponized the extended family against me. The contrast between my blood family and my future in-laws could not be more extreme. In Laotian culture, and particularly within my fiancé's family, elders are revered. Family unity is paramount. When they learned how my father was behaving, refusing the date, insulting their daughter, refusing to use her name, they were horrified. To them, this isn't just a disagreement over a calendar. It is a major disgrace. It is a level of disrespect that is almost unfathomable in their cultural context. They simply cannot understand how a father could treat his own son with such calculated cruelty. Despite everything, my fiancé's family still wants to honor him. They believe in taking the high road. They have reached out. They have tried to extend olive branches. They want him to be at the wedding, to sit in the place of honor, because that is what tradition demands. But he ignores them. He ignores their calls, their messages, their attempts at diplomacy. He views their kindness as weakness. The situation has become so untenable, so deeply painful, that my fiancée sat me down the other night. She held my hands, looked at me with tears in her eyes, and offered a solution that absolutely broke my heart. She said, "If he doesn't come, my family will just honor you as if both of your parents have passed away." Think about the weight of that statement. At my wedding, the happiest day of my life, my in-laws are preparing to treat me like an orphan, because the reality is my mother is in the ground and my father is choosing his bigotry over his son. It is a tragedy of his own making. I am losing my father, not to illness, not to an accident, but to his own toxic, narcissistic pride. Part 7, The Light in the Dark. There's only one sliver of light in my bloodline right now, my younger brother. When you grow up in a toxic household, siblings usually go one of two ways. You either turn on each other to compete for the toxic parents' approval, or you bond together in the trenches. Thank the universe, my brother and I are in the trenches together. My younger brother and his wife are coming to the wedding. They have been super supportive. They see our father for exactly who he is. My brother has told me, behind closed doors, how proud he is of me for finally standing up to the dictator. He knows the emotional toll it is taking, and he refuses to let our uncles and aunt drag him into the bigotry. Having my brother there means I won't be entirely alone on my side of the aisle. It means a piece of my mother's legacy, the love she instilled in her boys, will be present. But it doesn't entirely erase the agonizing void of a father's absence. This brings me to the absolute breaking point, the reason I am putting this story out into the world. Every fiber of my being, every societal expectation, every movie I've ever watched tells me that I need to have my father at my wedding. You only get one father, you are supposed to forgive, you are supposed to turn the other cheek. A dark, guilty part of my brain keeps whispering, is it really that hard to just change the date? Is it worth destroying the family over? But then the rational, healing part of my brain, the Buddhist teachings of mindfulness and self-respect, screams back at me. If I change the date, I'm telling him that his bigotry won. If I change the date, I am telling my fiancée that her cultural and spiritual traditions are secondary to an old man's racist ego. If I change the date, I am teaching my future children that the way you handle a bully is by giving them your lunch money and thanking them for it. I am standing at the edge of a cliff. I have spent 43 years trying to earn the love of a man who is incapable of giving it. Should I just cut him out of my life entirely? Should I send him an invitation he will burn, or should I close the door on him forever, walk to the altar as a man without a father, and build a new, clean, beautiful family with the woman I love? Is walking away from your own father the ultimate failure, or is it the ultimate act of self-love? They say that when you finally stand up to a tyrant, the loudest sound in the world is the silence that follows. For weeks after that last agonizing text exchange, I waited for the other shoe to drop. I woke up every morning with a knot in my stomach, checking my phone, bracing for the inevitable explosion. I expected my father to show up at my front door, or to rally the extended family into an all-out war. But the explosion never came. Instead, he deployed his favorite weapon, total suffocating silence. He thought he was punishing me. He thought that by withdrawing his presence, I would panic and come crawling back, begging for his forgiveness, willing to change my wedding to December 12th just to have him look at me again. He severely underestimated the strength I had gained. About a month after the cutoff, the flying monkeys arrived. My two uncles and my aunt, the loyal foot soldiers of my father's toxic empire, started calling. They didn't call to ask how I was doing. They called to deliver his message by proxy. My aunt cornered me on a Tuesday night. Her voice was dripping with that sickly sweet, passive-aggressive disappointment. "You know you're breaking your father's heart," she said, sighing deeply into the phone. "He's an old man. He just wants what's best for the family. Is it really so hard to just compromise and change the date? You're tearing this family apart over stubbornness." I felt the old guilt rising in my chest, the familiar programming trying to pull me back into line. But then I looked across the living room at my fiancée. She was sitting on the rug, peacefully arranging flowers for our living room altar, completely unaware of the poison coming through the phone. I took a deep breath, letting the Buddhist teachings of non-attachment ground me. "Aunt Susan," I said, my voice eerily calm, "I am not tearing the family apart. I am getting married on the day my spiritual leaders blessed. If my father chooses to view my happiness as a personal attack, that is his tragedy, not my responsibility. Do not call me about this again." And I hung up. I didn't just hang up the phone, I blocked her number. Then I blocked my uncles, and finally, with a shaking finger, I blocked my father. For the first time in 43 years, the throne room was empty, and the king was locked out. October 4th, 2026 arrived crisp, golden, and perfect. If my father had been there, the morning would have been a high-stress nightmare. He would have complained about the parking, criticized the venue, and made subtle, cutting remarks about my in-laws to assert his dominance. Instead, the morning was filled with a profound, sacred peace. We held the ceremony at a beautiful botanical garden, under the watchful, serene eyes of the monks from our temple. The air smelled of jasmine and burning incense. My younger brother stood beside me as my best man. He adjusted my collar, looked me in the eyes, and said, "Mom would be so incredibly proud of the man you are today." It was the only moment I allowed myself to cry. When it was time to take our places, my fiancé's family initiated the tradition they had promised. Because my father had refused to attend, they treated me exactly as they would a son who had tragically lost both of his parents. In Laotian culture, this is not done with pity, it is done with overwhelming honor. The elder men of her family, her father, her uncles, and her grandfather stepped forward. They didn't just welcome me. They formed a physical and spiritual wall of protection around me. During the Basai ceremony, the traditional tying of the white strings around our wrists to bind our souls and bring good fortune, her father tied my wrist first. He looked at me, his eyes full of a fierce, protective warmth, and whispered, "You are not a disappointment. You are our son now, and you will never walk alone again." I realized in that exact second that blood is just biology. True family is a choice. My father chose his ego. These people chose me. The wedding was the most beautiful day of my life, but the true test of my decision came 2 months later, on December 12th. Remember, that was the date my father had commanded I get married on. The date he swore he was going to announce to the extended family as the real wedding day. I didn't know it at the time, but my younger brother told me the story later. On December 12th, my father hosted a dinner at his house. He invited the entire extended family, my aunt, my uncles, and several cousins. He didn't explicitly call it a protest dinner, but everyone knew exactly what it was. It was a show of force. It was his way of proving that he still controlled the center of gravity, that even though I had defied him, he still had the loyalty of the family. He expected my younger brother to be there. My brother, who had stood by my side in October, received the invitation. He didn't argue. He didn't start a fight. He simply texted our father, "I have plans with my wife tonight. Enjoy your dinner." According to my aunt, the dinner was a miserable, quiet affair. My father sat at the head of the table, cutting his steak in brooding silence. The uncles tried to make small talk, but the atmosphere was suffocating. By demanding total control, my father hadn't preserved his empire. He had isolated himself on an island. He looked around that table and realized that his youngest son had politely opted out and his oldest son was entirely gone. He was the king of nothing but his own bitter pride. It has been nearly a year since I cut my father off. I won't lie and say it is easy. There are days when I see a father and son laughing together at a restaurant and a sharp, sudden grief hits me right in the chest. I mourn the father I deserved, the one I spent 43 years waiting for, the one who never actually existed. But that grief is nothing compared to the immense, liberating peace I feel in my daily life. My home with my wife is a sanctuary. There is no yelling. There is no walking on eggshells. We practice our faith, we respect each other's cultures, and we are building a life founded on actual love, not transactional obedience. My father's bigotry and his need for control cost him his son and any future grandchildren he might have had. It is a steep, tragic price to pay for ego. If you are listening to this and you are trapped under the thumb of a toxic parent who uses the word family as a weapon, I want you to know that you are allowed to walk away. You are allowed to protect your peace. You do not owe your abuser a front row seat to your happiness. The moment you stop trying to redeem yourself in the eyes of someone who is committed to misunderstanding you is the moment your real life begins. I am completely torn apart by this, and I need the raw, honest perspective of people who have survived toxic families. If you were in my shoes, if your father called you a disappointment for marrying the love of your life and demanded you change your sacred wedding date to appease his ego, what would you do? Would you cut him and the bigoted extended family off completely and let them be miserable together? Or would you leave the door cracked open, hoping that the reality of missing his son's wedding might finally break his pride? Please tell me your honest opinions in the comments below. I am reading every single one because right now, I need the strength of a community to help me make the hardest decision of my life.